Hi. Today is September 23rd, 2025. And as I'm sure many of you have heard, there's supposed to be a rapture today. There's not. Um, there's a guy there's a pastor named Joshua Mlakala. I think that's how you say his name. But he predicted that, he said Jesus told him that there was going to be either a rapture today or tomorrow. Um, And a lot of people, it's been talking about it. It's been causing a debate about the rapture, whether or not it's a biblical idea, um, and about like biblical prophecy or about prophecy in the body of Christ. First of all, if you don't believe him, that's okay. I want to say that because there have been so many prophets, internet prophets over the past years who have said things that just didn't happen. They just didn't come true. And I actually, when I became a believer, I was going to charismatic churches. I would even say kind of hyper charismatic churches. And then as I got older and I began to read more and study more, I would fall more into a category of a continuationist. I believe in the gifts of the spirits, but I believe that they are for the local church and for evangelism. So I believe that for the building up and the encouragement of the local church and for the affirmation of the gospel during evangelism. But I don't necessarily believe in people creating these massive worldwide ministries based on their gifts. Um, so that being said, what about the rapture? So when you're listening to somebody, I heard somebody who actually respect, he's an Orthodox priest. He was actually saying how the rapture was unbiblical. And there was a guy recently I met who was saying the same thing. The rapture is unbiblical. And I want to clarify that. The rapture is not unbiblical, but what is unbiblical is pre tribulation, premillennialism, and the secret rapture idea that was all a part. It was became such a part of Christian culture in the 80s and 90s and maybe early 2000s. I'm not sure whenever the Left Behind series was created. When I became a believer, they were probably already like 5 books deep into the Left Behind series. And I think they were still making them. I don't know how many. I've never read one of them. Um, but yeah, people became very convinced by this idea, especially through those sort of works that were being produced. But the early church fathers, and I mean, when I say the early church fathers, I mean like the spiritual grandchildren of the apostles and the disciples and the spiritual children of them, like Irenaeus and Polycarp. These guys, um, they actually believed in what we call today post tribulation premillennial premillennialism. So basically, they believed this idea that there was going to be a massive worldwide tribulation, and then Christ would come back. He would raise the dead in Him, rapture the church, and begin a millennial reign. He did not believe this is going. They did not believe this is going to be a secret. It is going to be something that everyone would see when it happened, and it would happen after some period of great tribulation. And they fully believed in a millennial reign, which is something. The term they used was Chiliasm. Chiliasm is what they would use, and I think that just means like thousand, or I don't remember exactly, but um, so this is what they believed in. Now, later on, and we're talking like I should say officially later on, there were this idea began to be questioned by some of the other, and I don't want to call them church fathers because reality is when you start getting into like 200 and 300 AD, I know some people will call them church fathers because they helped build the foundation of the church, but that's kind of like calling like Trump a a founder of America, because we're like 250 years into this, and maybe if America lasts for 1,000 years, maybe might look back in history and call them that. But yeah, so there were hold on, now I lost my notes here. Yeah, okay, so there were some. It was the predominant view of the early church for about the first 200 years was this idea of a future millennial reign that would follow the rapture of the church after a great tribulation. You had people like uh, Papias and Justin Martyr and Irenaeus and Tertullian, Hippolytus. They had a bunch of people who wrote openly about this and believed in this whole idea. But then you start going into another period of time in the church where people start questioning it. So you have Origen; he was one of the early ones, and Augustine began to question it also. But eventually, uh, through some different councils, this idea became more marginalized and eventually called heresy, or eventually determined as heresy by the church. But we're talking hundreds of years later. Um, but in the beginning, this is what the church fathers believed. I mean, like I said, these are the spiritual children and grandchildren of the apostles and of the early disciples. So, and this is a universal belief system. No, I wouldn't say universal. I'd say the majority belief system of them. And that's what I believe. And actually, I don't believe that because of them. I actually learned that the early church fathers believed that later on. I believe that because of just personal study. And so but they affirm those ideas. So when it comes to the rapture, and if somebody says, "Hey, I just found out the rapture isn't really a thing," it is. But what's not a thing is this secret rapture that Darby taught, and that has become really prevalent within the evangelical church. But I really feel like it's dying out. I honestly feel like it's an idea that had its time, and there's been enough pushback against it, and there's been enough people learning about like what early church fathers taught or some of the different eschatology ideas, and it's kind of dying out. um but so if Jesus comes back, you're going to know it. But if you're a Christian, there's nothing to prepare for. Just every day live your life for him, and that's the preparation. Be the servant now, and don't worry about when he's coming back. Because the fact is, we're all going to see him, whether or not there's a rapture tomorrow or in 100 years or in 1,000 years. Eventually, all of us will meet him face to face. And so don't be concerned about that. Instead, be concerned about the work you're doing now, being faithful to do the things that the Lord has given you to do. And if you don't know what those are, my first video, which I'm probably going to redo, um, highlighted the very simple things, the talents that God has given every single one of us. That's our testimony, it's the Bible, it's prayer, it's fellowship, and it's time. So use those things wisely, invest in those things, be faithful Christian, don't worry, and have a great day.